All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Cultivating Change Through Agriculture Technology, or AgTech. My name is Sarah Garland, and I'm the founder and executive director of Triple Helix, a nonprofit dedicated to building cross-sector engagement around AgTech. And one of our areas of focus is elevating the dialogue around the critical role of AgTech in climate action. So I want to briefly thank the Aspen Institute for prioritizing this topic at this year's event and hosting this panel. We have a great group of speakers here on the stage, and I'm excited for them to share their perspectives with you. But first, as just a bit of framing for the conversation we're about to have, I'm going to briefly set the stage for why innovation in agriculture must be at the forefront of climate decision making. Do any of you happen to know what percentage of global emissions come from agriculture? No one? 30. Ooh, those are a little high. There are obviously error bars, but it's around 25%. And that number in and of itself is a reason that we should be having this conversation. Those emissions are composed of different types of greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide in this space is primarily from deforestation and degrading peatlands for agricultural land expansion. There's nitrous oxide emissions resulting from fertilizer use, and methane driven by livestock and rice cultivation. But on top of these significant emissions, agriculture is also extremely vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Conditions like extreme heat, drought, flood, shifting seasons all profoundly impact agriculture. And these weather conditions also affect the severity and the geographic range of pests and diseases, which further threaten yields. So we clearly need to develop enhanced strategies for resilience in agriculture. And that's where AgTech comes in. Tools like crop biotechnology, biological inputs, artificial intelligence, just to name a few, can help us increase agricultural productivity and resilience, protect biodiversity and natural resources, and of course, decrease greenhouse gas emissions from the sector. So in this panel today, I'm looking forward to discussing exciting opportunities for AgTech to have impact, as well as how to overcome some of the very real challenges facing this space. So with that, let's just start by kind of going down the line here. And if you could share your name and explain your current involvement in AgTech.
Great,
hand it over to you.
All right, thank you. Thanks for being here. Beautiful day here in Chicago, where I happen to live. So my name is Ashley Grosh, and I'm with Breakthrough Energy. So Breakthrough Energy was established in 2015, so almost 10 years ago, by Bill Gates, who came and said, we need a different platform, we need a different way of thinking about deploying capital into these hard-to-abate sectors. And so Breakthrough Energy got stood up and started with our venture fund. Fast forward to today, we have Breakthrough Energy Ventures is on their third fund. And then we've created a broader platform to be able to support the full stages of innovation. So we focus in 3 areas. At the very early front-end stage, discovery, that's what I run. So those are technologies that are way upstream, new companies and new IP that are being developed in universities and academia. We need to de-risk those technologies. So I'll talk a little bit today about some of the interesting things I'm seeing in ag there. Then we have our ventures group, and then we've added on some other funds to support the gaps in capital for first-of-a-kind financing. And so we also have project finance funds and using blended capital to help scale these new technologies. We work globally. We have about 160 and growing portfolio companies that we support, and we work in the hardest to abate sectors. So that's agriculture being one of the core, transportation, buildings, electricity, and manufacturing. Thanks.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Christina Rohr. I'm a managing director with S2G Investments. At S2G Investments, I co-lead our food and ag platform. S2G Investments has $2.5 billion in committed capital, and we focus on 3 sectors: food and agriculture, energy transition, and oceans. Our food and ag platform was established back in 2014, and we have made over 65 investments in the space. We cover the entirety of the food supply chain, so we cover agriculture to supply to consumer. We back companies and entrepreneurs that have the potential to create better outcomes for the environment and human health. So the topic today is very relevant to a lot of the work that we're doing. At S2G, agriculture is a very important component of our work, both from an investment perspective, but also from an ecosystem stakeholder engagement standpoint. We believe that collaboration is key to promoting some of these technologies that are so critical to climate and also to farmer profitability. So look forward to unpacking some of the discussion points today.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Greg Fisher. I'm the VP of Finance for Kula Bio. Kula Bio is a nitrogen biofertilizer startup based just outside of Boston. We were founded in 2018, and since that time, we've really been working to perfect our biofertilizer, work with farmers to help them transition to a more sustainable source of nitrogen, and help in this critical climate transition that we're working on right now. So excited to be here, excited to be up with these other panelists, and thank you, Sarah, for being our moderator.
Of course.
My name is Chris Gasser. My wife and I run GX Agriculture in Southwest Iowa. We're a farming operation, and we also grow small grains for cover crop seed and for a distillery in Iowa. And we do a lot with conservation, partnering with companies and universities on research, and just finding ways to be more efficient using technologies, whether it's nutrient modeling strategies, weather modeling, different biotech, biological solutions to fertilizer and things like that.
Well, I'm really excited that we have a really diverse range of experiences with ag tech on the panel today, and I think that will add to the depth of the discussion. There are obviously many opportunities for innovation in agriculture to tackle climate challenges, both tools that already exist and also concepts that may be farther out in the development pipeline. Could you each share an area of ag tech that you are really excited about right now and what impact that could have in practice? And we don't have to go in line. Whoever wants to, feels moved to start.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, as in all things in our lives these days, AI, really has the potential to make an impact. Where I think about it a lot is in two different spaces. One is we're a microbial company, right? And we sort of pride ourselves on the fact that we're a non-gene edited, non-GMO microbe to start. However, that puts us a little bit at a disadvantage and potentially limits our ability to really make an absolutely tremendous impact in the future. So our ability to take these new resources, shorten that cycle time from development to commercialization could really have a great impact. And then the second thing for me is really around precision, right? Precision agriculture. It's something that gets talked about a lot. We started our journey in specialty produce that uses precision fertigation. But I think there's a lot of opportunity with drones and other technology to really amplify those things, reduce our inputs, maximize our outputs, and things like that. So pretty excited for those two things to see where they take us.
Maybe to build on that, similar to the products that you mentioned, one area that we are tracking closely and we're very excited about is around biological inputs. The biological sector has seen a lot of companies, and I think the success of several of these companies has been put into question. But what we're seeing is that there is an increased focus on improving the performance, the stability of these products, and also the manufacturing operations. We are particularly excited, so we see companies like New Leaf, for example, in our portfolio, and they've increased their acreage by more than 50% year over year for the past 3 years. Right now, they're close to 9 million acres, and they're showing consistently increases in yields of more than 7 bushels an acre, which is really a fantastic outcome. So we are really tracking the biological input space and putting that into the context of a systems level. Can these products improve the performance of the entire product stack? Can they add to farmer profitability? And importantly, can they be beneficial for soil health and add some of the resilience benefits that we want to see over the long term from our soils?
Sticking with AI, I know there's a lot of talk about it, right? But I think some of the applications, and the real farmer can tell us, are they helpful yet or are they not? Precision farming, using nanoparticle application is something that we're looking at. There's another one that we funded called Hoofprint Biome. And so this uses an AI and machine learning system to develop an enzyme that can better optimize the rumen or the gut of a dairy cow. And so helping it, uptake efficiently more of the nutrients, but then creating greater volume. And so in that scenario, right, there's a lot of cost savings. There's sort of a win-win. But that system and technology was all developed via AI. And so we're excited to see them to be able to expand that into other biologic or probiotics for animal feed. The other one that's a little bit longer term, because where I sit, I'm looking at things that are about 10 years out of what we might need. And there's a workshop and a thesis that we're developing that's called Food Without Farming. And so this is thinking about if you did have low-cost hydrogen, how could you use that to feed microbial organisms that might develop proteins that you can extract and then grind those down into a powder as an alternative protein source. And that's to be additive, right? Not as a supplement for what we do today, but if you model out the need for arable land and for water, we may not get there to meet the demand. And so we have to be really thinking outside of the box about how we might be able to grow food in different ways.
I would definitely say precision agriculture is super important, whether it's the new technologies like See and Spray, where instead of blanket applying a chemical to a whole field, you're only spraying the weeds where they are. You save on input costs and you're putting less chemicals in the environment. Or for like fertilizer applications, they're developing green sensors that you put on like the front of your implement so it knows how much nitrogen to supplement on the back so you're not over applying or under applying. And then absolutely AI, just because like nutrient modeling is very, very complicated, because like your nutrient uptake efficiency, what you need, what's available, what leached, like the things, those factors are, what has the weather been? What has the temperature been? What is the weather going to be? What are the temperatures going to be? What our outlook is? What's the yield potential? Soil types. There's a lot of factors to come together to try to develop that exact nutrient program so you're not over or under applying and being efficient with your use. And a lot of things like that where I think technology will be super helpful and just let us be better stewards over time.
Those are all such great examples, and I think we often sometimes talk about these innovations as separate entities, but in the field we end up combining them, and I'm excited to see how they can work together for maximum impact as well. We are here at a climate summit, and my favorite part of attending events like this is the opportunity to learn about different types of climate expertise. So what is one thing that you wish the broader climate community understood better about agriculture?
I think going back to nutrient usage like fertilizers and stuff, like I know there's a lot of talk about, like clean water and things like that. Like, and from my perspective, I don't want to leach nutrients. Like, I don't want any of that to go into the environment. That's bad for me. That's also bad for my bottom line. Like from a cultural and just like an investment standpoint, it's not very smart, especially with margins getting tighter over time and things becoming more difficult with pricing. Like we want to do the best job we can, and I don't want to apply a bunch of stuff that I don't need to if I don't have to.
Just to build on that, maybe, it's pretty interesting. We had a farmer come up to our site in Natick, Massachusetts, and you're saying, hey, if you can solve my leaching problem, I'll buy your product all day. And I didn't get it at first. I didn't understand what he was talking about. I had leaching in my mind as sort of this climate topic, and okay, well maybe he's getting some sort of tax from the county or something like that, and he can directly output it, but it wasn't that. He ultimately said to us that if I walk out and I look at my lettuce plants and they're yellow, right, I can't recover that, right? So if you can keep my nitrogen where it belongs around the root zone, then that provides a huge insurance policy for me down in Florida, where it rains a lot and I have poor soil quality and the nitrogen is potentially leaching out, right? So, to the point of just looking at these things as not only a climate aspect, but also what does it mean to the farmer, right, in terms of their investment and how it benefits the overall farm economics, I think is really important for all of us. You mentioned before that there was a lot of new innovation and everything. And one of the things we struggle with is actually this cloud of confusion that exists at the farm gate, right? How do you make sure that you can talk to the farmer and have them trust you in terms of the fact that you're going to actually deliver the value that you're promising? So even though there's all this innovation going on, it's this funnel right into every farmer that's sort of overwhelming, and we struggle to break through that at points.
And I think maybe to build on that, I think innovation doesn't move at the speed of software, which I think is potentially a misunderstanding. As you mentioned, farmers have one season to try, and they oftentimes have several solutions. Some of them may be incomplete or not the way there. So I think for us, a key is thinking through how can we de-risk for the farmer the ability to try on new solutions that could be very, very impactful to his crop, right? Or to his or her crop. So the potential for collaboration is key. I think innovation and scalability of this innovation is going to take longer. Can we bring different forms of capital to ag tech is very important. And also, can we provide the farmers with tools to de-risk the first step, whether it's pilots, different forms of financing, and also education and the ability to bring agronomic tools to understand these new solutions is very important as well from our point of view.
I would add it's a systems-based thinking, right? And so you can't think about these things in isolation, just thinking about ag tech on its own, right? So it's sort of the food, energy, water nexus of things. And also just staying close to the farmer from the beginning. I spend my days meeting with entrepreneurs and getting to look at great technology that sounds amazing, but what we need to do is connect them and those ideas to the farmer as soon as possible, right? Because we're gonna learn a lot, and then we're gonna understand what the barriers are. So customer discovery, product market fit, and then figuring out that trust. And is there a syndicate of partners that we can work with to do in-field pilot testing? There's a lot of risk there, right? And so you want to find the right partners so that you can do adequate demonstration and risk and learn from that, take some pivots potentially, and then start to scale up. But we need early adopters as well, people that are super curious and want to partner, but we can't just shift all of that technical risk to the farmer in early days. So we need to sort of start small, find the right partners. But that's one of our goals, is when we find a new amazing technology, it's, okay, well, let's go immediately talk to the supply chain. Let's talk to the farmers right away. The other thing about the systems piece of this is the water component of it, because we're talking a lot about AI, but then as we've all probably been reading, the use of water for data center cooling. So that leads us to also be looking into those types of technologies. But there's a big pull on the grid, right, to do all these other things, to take care of all these other advancements that we're super excited about. But what is that pull on the grid? What does that pull on water look like? And then how does that impact our agricultural system? So it's really a systems level thinking and sort of 360 that you need to do when you're assessing the solutions. And then how you're bringing them to market, working with the right partners.
It's really true, and it resonates what you say, because there's so many different layers, and agriculture is so complex. I mean, there's a incredible need for investment. There's an incredible need for partners. There's an incredible need to also look at yourself as part of a startup organization and say, what's my value proposition, right? How do I make sure that I bring this technology to market in a way that's not going to completely disrupt the economics of the people that I want to try to help? So, we need all the partners we can find.
Yeah, different mindsets I think is key. Like, I get the opportunity to work on some different projects like perennial ground cover and things like that. And we bring in a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds, and that helps a lot because people think about things a different way based on what they are, and like you kind of get stuck in like your mindset. But even, like you said, from the development standpoint, somebody was trying to develop a sensor that you pulled in the ground as you went to try to establish what your nutrients were and stuff like on the go. And so they were asking me all these questions about it, and they're like, well, what kind of a shank would I need? Because I want to go 12 inches deep. And I'm like, 12 inches deep takes a lot of power. Like, could we do like 8? And then like you show them like what that takes and like the amount of horsepower and like just things that you didn't have in your thought process that would have like potentially derailed them down the road.
So going a bit deeper onto all of these aspects we just talked about, there are clearly particularities about advancing ag tech that might be different than other areas of climate innovation. So let's say we have an ag tech tool that has been developed that works really well in a lab or a field trial. From your experience all the way through the ag tech ecosystem, what factors need to align, or what actions do different stakeholders need to take to actually get that innovation that at the pilot stage works really well to be adopted and have meaningful impact in practice?
Well, maybe I'll highlight 3 things. I think you mentioned, I think this was already mentioned, but the importance of proving that your product works on actual farms in different environmental conditions is very important. I think the second piece is the profitability to the farmer. Being able to quantitatively prove the ROI and what it means for the farmer is also very important. And then the third piece that we've noticed is that there has, in the past, some companies pursue the narrative of being disruptors. And I think part of that sometimes means that the scalability may be impacted. I think with farmers working within a system, within the workflows, within their providers, and not changing at one step their whole entire product or workflow is also very important. So understanding how to work with your channel partners, understanding how to work with your other stakeholders in the supply chain, what your product means for them in terms of profitability is also very important. Those are some of the things that we've noticed from the ability to scale from an idea to commercial traction.
I mean, I think I would add to that, our own experience has shown that you go after the ag market and you think, wow, it's beautiful because it's so big, right? There's so much opportunity there. But it's really nuanced, right? And I think you mentioned you really have to prove that your product is going to work, but work under a lot of different conditions, a lot of varied crops, varied soils, varied temperatures. And so I think, we talked about the idea of partnering early, but also I think finding those farmers that, meet where you're trying to go as well and say, yeah, I think we could form that partnership and be on a bit of a journey together. And then leverage those results, when you get something that's meaningful to sort of expand out at a regulated kind of pace. So,
yeah, I think testing at a definitely broad variety of areas because, like I said, soil type, weather patterns, climate, growing seasons change a lot depending on where you are. Like even just through a field, but like from state to state or even parts of the state, there's a lot of variability. And how you manage those areas can be very different. You can get ideas from other places and you can tweak them and modify them, but like no 2 operations are really the same.
So in the Midwest, because we do a lot of that, in California, there's Western growers, there's the Ag Thrive Tech that you guys also participate in. There's at universities, there's Russell Ranch, there's Texas A&M has a lot of research and test farms. But in the Midwest, do you feel like that there's a good consortium of places to test or partners, or do we need to be thinking about building a bigger syndicate here?
I think there's a lot of opportunity. There's not always a lot of farmers willing to try new things. I think it's getting better as our general demographic is getting younger. There's less resistance to change and things like that. I really like partnering with universities and stuff, but one of their things is they tend to do everything on a very small scale. And it's easy to make something work in a 10 by 20 plot, and making it work on 20, 40, 100 acres is a much different scenario. So I think companies and some kind of the startups are better at more scale, and the university is better at replication. And if we could somehow combine those 2, I think that would be.
But I think
awesome.
I agree with that, and I think what you're getting to is this major gap that I think, yeah, and we're seeing that across some of the companies that we work with. They have to repeat the trials with different channel partners, with different growers, and there is not a single standard that shows that your product works, similar to farmer, right, where you have phase 1, phase 2, and so on trials. There is no equivalent for that in ag. So what that leads to is that the time to prove your product is much, much longer. It's several seasons oftentimes. And also in terms of investing the resources, you have to invest with each channel partner to prove out that your product works. So there's a lot of duplicative efforts as well.
So I think a lot of this has been still focused on like that early stage tech transfer, demonstrating that it works so that you can get some farmer enthusiasm for a product. But the economics of agriculture are pretty thin. So how can we actually get an innovation, a startup company, to scale to a level where we can have the climate impact and also be profitable? Is there policy mechanisms? Are there different financial mechanisms that we need as a community to be encouraging to get this space off the ground?
Yeah, we've talked about this a couple times before, but it's really leveraging a full capital stack, right? And so you're going to use different types of capital at different stages. So at innovation, right, you might be using more philanthropic capital, and then you layer in equity and debt and project finance. But then you really need the full stack. So then you need policy innovation as well. And so getting all of those colleagues and partners to work together across the capital stack, because once you get to Series A and B, then we fall into another sort of valley of death of how do you scale from there, right? And that's going to take some big institutional partners. That's going to take some other big capital partners. And so I think engaging them early too. They need to be connected to what the risks are. The other piece is insurance, right? Mm-hmm. So insurance companies have large balance sheets. They can be helpful too, but they also want to understand the long-term risk reward. But a lot of it is at the federal and state levels to really help us move the needle, but it's not going to be one flavor of capital. We're going to have to leverage that full stack.
I would echo though that getting adoption from a few farmers to wide adoption requires a lot of different partners. So we're taking the approach of sort of a top and bottom push and pull at the same time, where we know we have to create demand at the farmer level and prove the value proposition. But in order to scale in a really large way, we need to get into the distributors who supply the products into the farmers. And in some ways, they're even more complex because they're focused more transactionally, and we have to provide a value proposition to them. But then also they can be influenced by large CPGs saying, listen, we have to do this with grower packers and things like that. So there's a lot of nuance in terms of taking it from a few farmers up to a wide scale of adoption, I think. And to your point, it requires a lot of different partners.
Well, one of the things that I've started to realize as we start doing like more, we'll call it weird and or out of the box stuff is, people will ask other people in town what I'm doing, but they won't come ask me. And so my wife came up with this really great idea, and we haven't implemented it yet, but hopefully next year, where because the word around town and the running gag on our farm is, what's that gasser kid doing? And so she's going to make a sign with a QR code that leads to our website. So that way, you can ask me without asking me kind of thing. Because, they'll ask millions of other people around me. And, to the point where, I want to just, do stuff to see what it takes. Because, one year we had a cover crop mix with, dwarf sunflowers in it. And they're like, is that sunflowers? What is going on over there? And so, I thought about this year, give me the most, brightest, pink or orange or whatever flower. I want to see what I got to do to make people actually ask me what's going on.
I want to come back to how ag tech fits into the broader climate conversation. There are many different visions that exist for the future of climate resilient agriculture. My organization emphasizes the need to unite behind common goals and work together to achieve them. And that typically includes using a wide variety of approaches at the same time. How do you inspire those who might be cautious about using emerging technology in agriculture to consider these solutions as part of their strategies for a sustainable future?
So we, again, it's engaging people early, kind of meeting them where they are. But as investors, it's education. And so, yes, we back a lot of companies and we look at technologies, but we've actually really evolved how we engage these different communities. And so I mentioned the food without farming thesis that we're developing is so we host a workshop around that topic. And so we spend about 2 days with global thought leaders, and we really ask them to get in a room and duke it out and really push hard on why or why not this makes sense. And so, again, we study kind of who the experts are in a field. And then the second day is we bring people in that have ideas for companies. But we also invite people that are just wanting to learn about that sector. So either other investors that we work with in other areas, other NGOs, other thought partners, and we really want them there as observers to hear and learn, okay, where's technology headed, where the barriers are. But of course, we spend a lot of our time, as I mentioned, on the investment, making those decisions, sitting on boards, helping scale and build those companies, because as you mentioned, the nuance, right? We didn't even get into the supply chain of packaging and cold chain, and agriculture is just a beast. But we've really thought about, okay, how can we also use our leadership to educate? And so we do workshops, we host roundtables, we just get out there to Gordon conferences and go visit labs, visit farms, try to meet as many people as we can on the topic, but also serve as a big convening agent. So that's kind of been more about our process lately, is more about this educational platform that we can do.
I think, it's interesting. So as a finance person, you tend to think about the different stakeholders. And, one of the ones that I tend to think about a lot is landowners, right? And the quality of soil is indicative of productivity in a lot of ways, right? So from a long-term investment perspective, helping your soil, helping your farmer, makes a lot of sense. I think one of the other things as a non-farmer, but interacting with a lot of farmers, I empathize with you guys a lot on is, there's a lot of people coming to you right now and saying, you should be doing this, you should be farming this way, and stuff like that. I think what's resonated most with me, though, is, farmers are stewards of their soil, right? They have the interest to take care of their farm and their soil as long as the productivity and the economics make sense, right? So I think that's something we all have to realize, again, and often reiterate to ourselves, is that, hey, we're all in this together, right? And so you can't come to somebody like Chris here and say, you have to change this because you're doing something that's terrible. It's complicated.
Well, and to kind of echo along with that, I think some of it's like, it's easy to be critical, and I get that way sometimes because there's people in our area that still do a lot of tillage and stuff, and I don't necessarily see the use for it. But applauding progress, like if somebody went from full tillage to reduced tillage or strip tillage or things like that, like if you can appreciate someone's progress over time, they're more likely to keep updating instead of just like, well, if nobody cares if I change, then why would I bother? Or if they're going to criticize me that I could always be doing better, like what's the point of progressing, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think for us, similar, given the nature of the industry, which is obviously dominated by some large players, it's heavily regulated. The barriers to adoption, as we've talked about, are high. What we have focused on is how can we bring to our portfolio companies the tools that they would need to navigate this environment. And part of that, as everyone here mentioned, multi-stakeholder collaboration is key. And that's coming from a financing perspective, so fit-for-purpose capital, different forms of financing, partnerships with maybe some of the large players that have the distribution networks and can help scale the product. Also, as we're looking for access to talent and having the ability to leverage some of the expertise in the industry is important to us. So we always think about our companies and accessing the talent and building the as strong as teams as possible in their specific areas, because as you mentioned, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. But I think from our perspective, getting the collaboration component and understanding that our companies need, and the companies in the space need and benefit from this type of approach has been something we've evolved over the years.
You know, one other thing, just in terms of adoption, I was thinking about, as you were talking about the different stakeholders and things like that, but you know, we spend a lot of time focusing on educating farmers on what can Kula Bio do for you, right? And what we find is that with the farmer and agronomist, there's a lot of education on these biological tools that's needed still. And so, you know, if I take out the Kula part and I think about just nitrogen biologicals, you know, there's probably an element there that still needs to be bolstered in terms of general market education and what we're doing to help the farmers understand what is this technology, how can it fit in more broadly than one particular company's particular application.
Well, and I think landowner education has become more and more important as there's a lot more disconnect between people who own land and what they know about agriculture in general. Like a lot of my landowners now are the original people's children or children's children and things like that. And then like some of them live in Colorado or they live in cities or they live far away and they don't have the knowledge base. And like just one year, you know, we store grain for a farmer on a crop share. And I was like, hey, we got to sell a load right now because there's a hot spot in the bin and I got to pull it so you don't lose the rest of the bin. And they're like, oh, they didn't even understand that you had to manage that. So like knowing like what you're dealing with, and then so they know from a perspective if they're looking for like potential renters and managers that, you know, these are the kind of things you need to look for to make sure that they're preserving your asset and just being a good steward.
I think there's so much of that, you know, as we as a culture have gotten removed from everyone working in agriculture. You know, I think there's education at all different levels, from the landowner who is still somewhat connected to the person at the grocery store. And I think we all at different stages of the ag tech ecosystem can do our part either by developing really cool innovation or convening people around impact, can do our part to move this space forward. I want to make sure that we have some time for audience questions. I know we have some roving microphones as well. So if you have a question, raise your hand for any of the panelists. I saw the person in the back first, and then someone midway up here.
Hi, my name is Lily Aaron. I'm a college student studying environmental science, and I have 2 questions, and I'd really appreciate if you could answer both. My first question is assessing density-informed solutions like agrivoltaics in terms of commercial viability and scalability, and if you're seeing practical deployment opportunities and what barriers may look like to achieving meaningful scale, and if, I know you guys are coming from a biological innovation input standpoint, so if these sort of systems complement or challenge the work that you're doing. And for my second question, I was wondering about, with the current status of increased ICE raids and state-sponsored violence against undocumented farm workers who are essential to our food system, I was wondering if you're seeing this work affecting innovation priorities and technology adoption across the agricultural sector. So, thank you.
Thanks. Do you want to just get the question from this gentleman halfway up, and so we can group some of the questions?
Hi, I'm Ken Paulman from Canary Media, and my question is, we talked about, you know, ag as a significant source of emissions, and I'm fascinated by this conversation. I'm a farm kid myself from Nebraska, and so I understand there's a lot of inputs, and we're talking essentially about like maximizing yield from the inputs in a way, but I'm kind of wondering, how does this roll up into reducing emissions? Like if I'm going to explain, okay, these are really cool things going on, what is the ultimate climate impact, and are there particular sort of aspects that are a greater opportunity for reducing emissions than others?
All right, let's stop with those 3 for now. Do we want to anyone want to take a crack at any of those 3 to get started? Actually, why don't I answer the emissions one really quickly, because I think I'd love everyone else to chime in as well, but since we have some fertilizer discussion on the panel, when we can make sure that the nitrogen is used in the most efficient way, we are reducing what can then turn into nitrous oxide. And that's a really powerful, obviously, productivity gain and economic gain, but also a climate gain because we don't have that really potent greenhouse gas being emitted. I think on that systems level view, deforestation in the Amazon has a biodiversity impact, also has a climate impact. So increasing efficiencies to not expand our footprint more certainly has a protective effect against biodiversity loss and emissions. And then, of course, we were talking about methane and the livestock sector. That obviously has been getting a lot of attention, but figuring out how to, again, innovate so that we can produce protein and other products to sustain us while not having that methane emissions there is how some of those innovations can have impact. Does anyone else want to chime in? That was just an overview.
Maybe just really quickly, I think soil can also be an important carbon storage sink opportunity here. So I think a lot of the tools that we talk about can improve soil health, soil organic matter, which in turn can really help soil become part of the solution, not of the problem. So we're interested in products and technologies that can also increase soil organic matter and can contribute to carbon capture, which is another area that we're interested in.
To your point on that, the MRV, so monitoring and reporting, validating, so those technologies become really important to understand. To your point, how are we measuring the impact? What's the baseline, right? And that's a whole other complicated thing, but there's technologies and sensors and all kinds of things that we're using to establish what a baseline is. And then our screen for investment is everything that we fund has to demonstrate it can abate 500 million tons of CO2 per year at scale. And so, we are looking for things that can move the needle around impact. The carbon sink thing for the soil is super important. There's other innovations. There's a company called Silicate that can take waste concrete. So waste concrete's a big issue, and they can grind that down and use the lime that's in there as a replacement in some fertilizer. So it's all about using less at every step of the way. And so if we can reduce the amount of fertilizer by using a different input from sort of a circular system, and then that also works as a carbon sink, those are kind of like the win-win-win technologies that we're looking for. But great question around, the emissions impact. You have to measure where you are today and then keep measuring as that work moves forward and as technologies get into the ground. And then back to her first question.
Yeah, please.
Was it photovoltaics? I missed the first piece.
Yes, it was agrivoltaics, so growing crops underneath solar panels.
Growing them underneath solar panels?
Yes.
Chris, have you done any of that?
We don't have any solar panels. From an agricultural perspective, one of the better options is like grazing sheep and stuff. They want to expand to cattle, but cattle tend to push and press on things a lot more, so it can be a lot harder on equipment. So right now, grazing opportunities or haying opportunities are there. As far as crops, a lot of our main crops are very photosensitive and things like that, and require a lot of what we call GDUs, but growing degree units, which are the amount of sunlight, heat, etc., energy that it takes to grow a crop. So if it's shaded all the time, your usage of that is a lot lower, but for hay crops or grazing, that's not as much of a problem. And then for your labor question, we don't use any migratory labor, but I know a lot of people who do, and I think technology is going to play into that because getting visas and stuff has become a lot harder. And so supplementing that with autonomous technology or things like that, I think is going to be more crucial over time.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, no, anything else on those three questions?
Yeah, maybe just to add on the, connection between sort of the fertilizers and sort of the environmental component. But I spend a lot of time looking at how we can get our Cultivating nitrogen fertilizer, into these systems. And, it's really interesting to think that, only 50% of the nitrogen fertilizer that gets put down is actually used by the crop. The rest of it ends up washed and blown away where it doesn't belong. Some of these new technologies, like this microbial technology we like to say it brings the factory to the field, right? And it works in concert with the plant to say, what is the signal that the plant's actually sending me, and what is the nutrient that I actually need to deliver? Now, that's a way oversimplification of it, but these tools and technologies exist. It resonates with me so much. I came from pharma and biotech, and it resonates with me so much in terms of the parallels and the differences between pharma, right? There is no governing body that allows Chris to go, oh yeah, that's safe and efficacious, right? And then we should figure out how to pay for it. And then the other thing that's super interesting to me is these technologies are like what we see, I think, in our personal lives with medicine, right? For the longest time, we found these interesting small molecules that would act on the body in a certain way. And if they left a wake of destruction behind them, but still produce the outcome, okay, not so bad, right? Now medicine has moved to how do we get the body to do what we need it to do using its own tools, and how do we minimize that destruction? And for me, ag tech is very much in a similar thread, just a little bit behind that. So I think it's a really interesting time for us.
One other thing I think is important to include on this climate aspect, and we didn't touch on it too much up here, but a lot of these tools are also key for adaptation. And that's, when I mentioned in the beginning that agriculture is so vulnerable to climate change, using AI to, better predict seasonal shifts so that farmers have a better sense of when to plant. Because again, it's a big risk that you're taking each season. Or using different types of disease resistance strategies, whether it's inputs or within the plant itself. I think there are lots of mitigative opportunities, but also a lot of adaptive opportunities for ag tech. Let's take another round of questions. I see white shirt here, tan blazer, and purple polo. Let's do that.
Thank you. Hi. My name is Melina Walling. I cover agriculture for the Associated Press. You touched on it a little bit, but I'm wondering, how do you square the real effects of data centers and the water and energy usage with some of these agricultural solutions that you're talking about? How do you is it worth it in the aggregate?
Tan, do you want to take a group?
Yeah, you can do
Let's do tan blazer. Yeah.
Hi, I live and work in a rural area in Minnesota where there's a lot of corn production for ethanol, which I view from what I've read as a false solution that we often come out environmentally behind on. What are you seeing in kind of the ag innovation tech space that might improve environmental outcomes for ethanol production? Thanks.
I am David with Food System Innovations, but my friends call me Purple Polo Shirt. I'm just curious, in terms of the investors on the stage, is there any reason to pay attention to the global nature of these solutions as opposed to the United States? I see a lot of attention in the United States, and I'm wondering if there are products that might be scalable in the United States that just aren't going to work globally. And so I'm thinking in terms of how much should we be paying attention to whether we're creating products that are actually going to be able to be used in other parts of the world, or if we're just being myopic and working in the United States?
Okay, so we have data centers, we have ethanol, and we have global impact. Who wants to kick it off?
Well, on ethanol usage, the plants are becoming more efficient over time at how they process ethanol, less wastewater. I actually live in the middle of nowhere, but our Poet facility is has the lowest water usage of any ethanol plant, and that also by association has one of the higher profitabilities. But also when they factor into those energy conversations, when they compare to things like oil and stuff like that, they don't take into account the byproducts like dried distiller grains that are still a feed source for livestock and that. So you're still getting some of that feed value and stuff out of the crop, but you're also getting ethanol along with it. It's definitely not a perfect solution, but it is a little better than how it is portrayed sometimes. Like even by California fuel standards, biodiesel is one of the best environmental options right now. So it's definitely not a perfect system, but sometimes they demonize it a little more than they should.
Okay, water and data centers.
So maybe a quick note on data centers and linking that to some of the ag-tech technologies that we've seen. So absolutely, water is a big pressure point, and certain basins are areas of high concern, and data centers augment that concerns given the water needs that these data centers need. So, for example, one of the companies that we work with, Arable, they have a suite of sensors, and they can work on pivot irrigation to effectively measure how much water farmers are using. And depending on the environmental conditions, rain, the field operations, they can get to very precise measurements of the water needs for that specific field. So this company had a pilot with Google in Nebraska where they've saved several 100 million gallons, and they actually outperformed the target savings by more than 50%, which I think speaks to the ability to connect more precise technologies on the field with alleviating some of these intensive resource needs.
I'll add to the data centers is, again, I'm going to go back to technology, is we do see other uses of ways to cool it. So instead of water, that's what we're looking for, are other cooling technologies. So there's a dielectric fluid or a gel, a company out of Minnesota, that can go over the components and it can absorb the heat that way, and then you can repurpose the heat. And so again, getting away from using water. So that company is called Liquid Cool Solutions and has been tested at NREL and is now being broadly adopted with the hyperscalers. The other thing is I don't think we're slowing down that train, really, but we're engaging with the hyperscalers who are willing to pay the green premium for some of these new technology adoption solutions, because they know the community, it's going to be super important that as this stuff scales, we've got to do it in an efficient way. So it's not putting a huge drain into water. You've seen, Microsoft burying the data centers offshore. Other places are doing that. So we've seen some 3D printed casing that can absorb heat. And so we're really looking for how do we cool this other than, having a huge impact on the water system. And then to our friend in the purple polo shirt, globally, you're absolutely right. We talked about this a little bit. This is why it's so tricky, because the solutions aren't going to just plug and play everywhere. An area that we look at is rice cultivation. I think it's, if you look at the daily caloric intake, it's massive. And so we put out actually a specific call across Southeast Asia and other parts of the world to look at technologies to help mitigate that specific crop in specific regions. We're still working on that. We have a couple companies. One is called Rise. But you're absolutely right. It doesn't necessarily scale, and so that can make it even more challenging. But also, maybe you can tweak a little piece of the technology or put some of these technologies together. But it's absolutely a global issue, and there's other parts of the world, right, that don't have the resources but are high emitters. And so we also do spend a lot of time thinking about how to penetrate those communities and who the right funding partners are to do that, but it's a great question.
I'd love to touch on that global impact as well, especially because we also have, because of the fertilizer touch here, there are some areas of the world where we need to be looking at how they can use more fertilizer. But of course, in an ideal situation, we wouldn't get into using synthetic fertilizers that obviously have nitrous oxide, but also upstream carbon dioxide impacts. And so I think looking at how we can use these tools to bolster productivity in communities that could really use that innovation without the harmful trade-offs is, I think, a really exciting area of ag tech. And of course, it takes engaging with those local farmers and understanding their needs, which is going to be different than in Iowa. But I think there is opportunity for ag tech to play a role there.
Yeah, I mean, just to comment on it, from a nitrogen perspective, we see a huge opportunity for biologicals in poor quality soil. I know we talked about high quality soil being important, but even in poor quality soil, there's an opportunity because in poor quality soil, it doesn't retain the moisture, it just goes right through. And so the fertilizer gets carried away with it. The biologicals have the opportunity to stay in place a little bit better, right? So if you're talking about arid regions or other, poor quality farming areas, there's a huge opportunity for things like nitrogen biofertilizers. I think, the other thing that is interesting to me is we do spend 90% of our time focused on the United States, but there are other big areas of agriculture that countries that are innovating significantly, particularly Brazil. Brazil is far ahead of the United States in terms of overall biological adoption. And so we think about, how do we get into places like that? And then you get into places where farming is just not industrial. It's still very much small farmers farming in a subsistence kind of way. That's another layer and another part of the complication in terms of how do we bring our biological product to somebody in remote India or in Africa. That's really complicated.
I could talk about this all day, and in fact, I do talk about it all day most of the time, but it is time to wrap up. I hope you take away from this session that agriculture is a very complicated space, but that it is also full of enormous opportunity for innovation and technology. Panel, do you have any closing thoughts or a call to action to share with the audience before we close?
I would say, well, thank you, fascinating discussion. And the call to action, I guess, is it's so broad, the field. And labor actually is a really challenging piece of this. And so for young people or people that are looking to pivot in a career or to branch out, I would encourage people to chase this sector. You can work, all throughout the supply chain. There's policy needs, there's financing needs, there's research, everything you could think of. So as people are pursuing their next opportunity, we do need to recruit more people into the sector broadly. So go spread the word about, all the wonderful things that agriculture has to offer.
Yeah, similar. I think the storytelling component is extremely important to help some of these solutions scale. So how do we connect the farmer to the consumer, and how do we make that feedback loop as frictionless as possible?
For me, it's excitement. I know we talked about a lot of the challenges, but there are so many tools in the tool belt right now, right? And we're just at the tip of what I think we're capable of doing. So I think everybody should leave here with a degree of excitement. We talk about these big challenges, but there are a lot of people out there trying to innovate and bring the cost down and make things more productive and bring these to remote places in the world. So, for me, keep being excited about agricultural innovation, spread the word as we talked about, and be our partners, right? Help us on the journey if you can.
I would say ask somebody. Like I said, my biggest thing whenever I'm trying something new or somebody has a question, they don't want to ask, or they're afraid, I don't know, to look stupid or something like that. And you don't know what you don't know, right? That's why I'm thinking about putting a QR code in a field. And there's a lot of social media accounts now for that. My wife does one for our farm, and so shameless plug, Farming with Shannon. But she started it when we started dating, just to show people in the city, her friends in the city, and what she used to do with what we were doing and why we were doing it, and the amount of questions and just stuff that came up from that was pretty awesome. So ask.
I love that. Ask. That's a very simple call to action. Well, thank you again to each of the panelists for sharing your perspectives. Thank you again to the Aspen Institute for hosting us. And I hope to continue the conversation with many of you throughout the rest of the event. Thank you.